The harbor was already awake when the scream of splintering wood ripped across the morning air. A luxury yacht 3 decks tall, white as bleached bone, charged through the fog like a predator, its engines pounding like war drums. On the water below, a far smaller craft struggled to hold its ground. An aging wooden vessel, weather-worn but dignified, its bow rocking helplessly against the surge. For 74-year-old Samuel Carter, that vessel wasn't just a boat. It was 40 years of sweat, scar tissue, and healing from the ghosts of war. It was home. "Hey, hey!" Samuel's voice was raw as he waved his arms from the deck, his joints aching from the movement. But his cries were swallowed by the guttural roar of the yacht's twin engines. Above, on the gleaming upper deck, laughter erupted, crystal glasses raised, champagne sloshing over manicured hands. At the helm stood Ethan Caldwell, billionaire tech mogul, celebrated savior of Seabrook Harbor. The papers had dubbed him the town's new golden boy, bringing progress and modern wealth to what was once a fishing community. He was 39, powerful, ruthless. To him, Samuel's vessel was nothing but driftwood in his path. The moment stretched. The old boat, Liberty Rose, rocked in the current as if bracing itself. Then came the strike. The impact thundered across the harbor, a sickening crunch as steel ground into timber. Liberty Rose buckled under the weight, its stern collapsing inward, planks bursting like ribs under a boot. Samuel leapt sideways onto the dock, his body hitting hard, bones screaming in protest. He rolled, coughing, as the crowd, joggers, tourists, dockhands gasped, phones raised high to capture every second. And then came the sight that hollowed him out. His flag. For 40 years, the stars and stripes had flown at the stern of Liberty Rose, faded but proud. Now it tore loose, flung into the swirling wake. It drifted on the foam, red stripes bleeding into the salt water like blood from a wound. Samuel staggered to his feet, chest heaving. His hands trembled as he limped toward the edge of the dock, ignoring the murmurs, the pointing, the digital clicks of cameras. He stretched down, his shoulder screaming, and snatched the sodden fabric from the water. He cradled it to his chest, the way he once cradled a dying brother in arms on a jungle floor half a century ago. The laughter from the yacht pierced the silence. "It's just a pile of wood, old man," Caldwell's voice carried, sharp and arrogant. His guests tittered, some raising phones for selfies, with the wreckage in the background. "Maybe it's time you realized everything and everyone has an expiration date." On the dock, no one moved to help. A harbor patrol officer hovered uncertainly in his small motorboat, making no move to intervene. The onlookers shifted awkwardly, but no hand reached out. Phones recorded as Samuel stood there, dripping flag pressed against his chest, his back straight despite the fire in his knees. His eyes met the crowd, and for a moment the noise faltered. There was no rage in his gaze, no begging for pity, only a quiet dignity that made the onlookers look away, shamed. But shame didn't last long. Notifications pinged across the harbor as the first video went viral. "Old man, old boat, old news." Laughter followed, cruel and careless. A dockhand snorted. A teenage girl typed, "LOL," before moving on. By noon, the Liberty Rose was gone. The broken remains were hauled away like refuse, leaving nothing but oil streaks and silence. For Samuel, it was like a phantom limb had been severed, the ache where something essential once existed. That evening, back at his modest cottage on the bluff, Samuel sat at his table with the flag stretched across his lap. His hands smoothed the fabric again and again, tracing the threads like a man memorizing a final goodbye. The chest sat open beside him, filled with fragments of a past he had never spoken of. Photographs of young men with stern faces. Letters browned with age. His navy dog tags, cold and weighty in his palm. At the bottom lay another flag folded into a perfect triangle, untouched by time. The one handed to him when he retired. His grandson David, visiting from college, leaned in the doorway. His young face was sharp with anger. "You're going to sue him, Grandpa," David said. "That bastard destroyed your boat. He's not untouchable." Samuel shook his head, voice low. "He didn't hit me. He hit something nobody else ever cared about." "That's not true," David protested, but his grandfather only lowered his gaze to the flag. His finger traced a star. Later that night, Samuel opened his weather logbook. For 40 years, Every day had its entry: the tide, the catch, the wind. Tonight, the page held only one line. First day without Liberty Rose. No condolences offered, but the water still calls. He closed the book. Outside, the harbor glittered with Caldwell's yacht lit up like a floating palace. Music drifted across the waves. Laughter rang out. Life went on, untouched. But for Samuel Carter, the silence inside his home was heavier than gunfire. And the sea, which had always been his refuge, now seemed a whisper of unfinished reckonings. The next morning, Seabrook Harbor buzzed, not with sympathy, but with mockery. On the diner television, news anchors smiled as they covered the accident. Caldwell's yacht, the Aurora Crest, was praised as the largest private vessel ever to grace the harbor. The broadcast hailed it as a sign of Seabrook's prosperous new future. Not a word about the Liberty Rose. Not a word about Samuel Carter. At the corner booth, Samuel sat with his coffee untouched, the cup cooling in his hands. His body ached, but it wasn't the bruises that stung most, it was the invisible wound of being erased. Across the diner, teenagers snickered over their phones, one turning the screen so her friend could see the viral clip. Samuel's soaked, bent figure clutching the torn flag. The caption read, "Boomer down." Laughter followed. Nobody even tried to lower their voices. Samuel didn't look at them. He only stared into the black swirl of his coffee until it reflected his own scarred face. Half a century ago, those scars had been earned in silence, far away on foreign seas. Now, they were a punchline. When he left the diner, a dock worker passed him without a nod. A young couple glanced his way, then quickly looked past him as if he were a ghost. Even the harbor master, whom Samuel had known for years, kept his voice clipped and distant when Samuel approached. "I'm sorry, Mr. Carter," the man said, his eyes fixed on his clipboard. "Insurance won't cover the loss. Your vessel didn't meet current standards, no modern radar reflectors, no certified navigation system. She wasn't compliant. She passed every inspection for 40 years, Samuel replied, his voice steady. The harbor master shifted uncomfortably. "Regulations change. I can't fight the law." Samuel gave a small nod, then turned away. He didn't bother explaining that Liberty Rose had been grandfathered into older rules, or that he had never missed a single inspection in his life. What was the point? The decision had been made long before the conversation. That evening, Samuel sat on his porch, the sea breeze tugging at his shirt. From here, he could see the harbor lights, the Aurora Crest blazing like a floating city of wealth. The music carried faintly, high laughter rising and falling. The absence of the Liberty Rose throbbed inside him like a phantom limb. He missed her timbers groaning in rhythm with the waves, the way the morning sun warmed her deck, the rocking that had lulled him into dreamless sleep when the nightmares grew too heavy. She had been the one place where the war's ghosts could not follow. Now, they followed him everywhere. As the night deepened, Samuel brought the folded ceremonial flag from his chest onto the porch. He draped it over the railing, letting the breeze lift its corners. The stars gleamed faintly in the moonlight, watching over him like the brothers who never came home. Inside, his phone buzzed on the counter. David had texted him, "Don't let them bury this. You're not invisible. Not to me." Samuel read it twice, then placed the phone face down. His hands trembled as he reached for his logbook again. Tonight's entry was longer. "The harbor is a stranger now. My boat is gone, but the silence still remembers me. The sea takes what it wants, but sometimes it gives back. I don't know what tomorrow brings. I only know the water still calls." He closed the book. The old house seemed to breathe around him, heavy with time. And as the clock struck midnight, Samuel Carter sat alone, an old sailor stranded on land, stripped of the only vessel that had ever carried his broken soul. Yet in the hush between the waves, something stirred. The sea was not finished with him. The nightmares returned that night. Samuel jerked awake in the dark, breath ragged, sheets tangled around his scarred legs. The smell of smoke still clung to his nostrils, the memory of burning fuel, the metallic sting of blood in the air. He pressed his palms to his face, but the past slipped through his fingers like seawater. Vietnam. He had been just a boy, barely 20, when the USS Hancock's engine room burst into chaos. Flames clawed the steel corridors, alarms screaming. Most of the crew had fled upward toward the safer decks, but Samuel's seaman then, not yet chief, had gone the other way. He still felt the weight of the wrench in his hands, the hiss of boiling steam peeling skin from his arms as he cranked the failing valve shut. Behind that bulkhead lay 200 sleeping sailors. Had the gas spread, they would have never woken. He never forgot the sound, the metallic groan as the door sealed, and the silence that followed, broken only by his own pain breathing. 60% of his body burned. Months in hospital. The doctors told him he should have died. Instead, he lived. And never once did he tell the full story. He'd refused the Navy Cross when it was offered. Take care of the boys who didn't make it, was all he'd said. It was a creed he carried into civilian life. Quiet work, quiet service. He never sought attention. Only the Liberty Rose, plank by plank, gave him peace after the war. Each nail he drove into her hull was like hammering shut a coffin for the ghosts that still whispered in his ear. Now the coffin was broken open, and the voices had returned. The next morning, David found him at the kitchen table. The young man's eyes burned with a fury Samuel remembered from his own youth, the anger of a generation unwilling to accept humiliation. "Grandpa, you can't just let this happen. That man destroyed your boat. The whole world is laughing at you." Samuel's weathered hands folded over the logbook. His voice was steady. "It was just wood and canvas." David slammed his fist on the table. "No, it was yours. You built it with your own hands, you lived on it. That yacht owner doesn't care about anything but himself. Why should he get away with it?" Samuel's gaze drifted to the folded flag on the sideboard. His voice grew quieter. "The war took men I loved. The sea gave me the Liberty Rose. Maybe this is just the balance of things." David's jaw tightened. He looked at his grandfather, saw the scars on his neck disappearing beneath the collar of his shirt, scars Samuel never explained. "You think silence is strength, but silence is how they erase you." The words lingered long after David left. Silence was a kind of erasure, but it was also survival. Samuel had survived 50 years by holding his tongue, bowing his head, letting the world forget. And yet now, forgotten hurt worse than fire. That night, he walked the harbor alone. His knees ached, but his stride was steady. He stopped at the empty mooring where Liberty Rose once rested, staring at the black water lapping against bare wood. On the far side of the harbor, the Aurora crest gleamed like a palace, neon spilling onto the water. A crowd of tourists lined the dock, taking photos of the spectacle. To them, the yacht was a marvel, a promise of wealth and progress. No one spoke of the boat that had been crushed beneath its bow. Samuel turned away. The night was heavy with salt and silence, but somewhere beneath the waves, he felt it the faintest pulse of recognition, as if the sea itself knew what had been lost. He went home, wrote in his logbook again. 40 years of silence. 40 years the sea carried me. Now it is gone, and I am ashore again. But the water still whispers. He closed the book, his hand trembling over the cover. He thought of David's words, echoing, "Silence is how they erase you." But what if the sea was about to speak for him? The town of Seabrook was changing, and not for the better. Samuel watched it from his bluff window like a man observing an infection spread. Where once weather-beaten trawlers had lined the harbor, now there were glassy condos, wine bars, and neon-lit marinas. The fishermen, who once drank coffee with him at dawn, had been driven inland, their slips sold to weekend yachtsmen. Seabrook, his Seabrook, was now a backdrop for selfies. The loss of the Liberty Rose should have stirred outrage. Instead, the opposite happened. By midday, the video of her destruction was on every platform. Clips set to rap beats, slow-motion edits of the hull cracking apart, memes overlaying the American flag sinking beneath the wake. Hashtags multiplied. Number, old man fails. Number, time to retire. Number, progress over rust. Samuel's face lined, scarred, desperate was spliced with captions. When Grandpa doesn't upgrade his boat since 1975, millions watched. Millions laughed. That evening, the local news ran a segment showing Caldwell standing at the Aurora crest's gleaming bow, arm draped around a movie starlet. The headline at the bottom read, "Billionaire's yacht ushers Seabrook into the future." The anchor smiled brightly. A minor incident this morning with an older vessel was quickly resolved. No one was hurt. No one was hurt. The words cut deeper than any blade. To them, Liberty Rose had been a pile of scrap. To Samuel, She had been the last bridge between his past and his peace. At his kitchen table, the chest still sat open, its contents spread like the fragments of a shattered identity. His medals lay at the bottom, dulled by time. Faded photos of boys in uniform stared up at him. He remembered their voices, their laughter in the mess hall, the silence when the war took them. He took out the ceremonial flag, unfolded it carefully. The crisp fabric still smelled faintly of gun oil and salt air. He draped it across the table, smoothing it with trembling hands. David appeared in the doorway, his anger simmering. "Grandpa, they erased you. They're making you into a joke." Samuel didn't lift his eyes. "I was never the story. The boat was never the story. The sea is older than all of this. It doesn't care." "I care," David snapped. "And so do the men you saved. Why don't you?" Samuel's hand lingered on a black and white photograph. Himself at 20, arms bandaged, face half burned, standing stiff beside his shipmates. Most of those faces were gone now. Buried at sea or forgotten in shallow graves overseas. "They're all gone," he murmured, "and the world moved on. Maybe that's what's supposed to happen." But even as he said it, his chest tightened. Because the world hadn't moved on, it had grown shallow, cruel, content to trample honor underfoot for clicks and likes. That night, Samuel wrote in his logbook again, "First day without the sea beneath me. The harbor applauds the man who destroyed my vessel. My silence keeps me alive, but it also buries me. I wonder which will end me first." He set the pen down, his hands shaking. Outside, the aurora crest glowed like a floating cathedral, laughter spilling into the dark. Samuel stood on his porch, the folded service flag over the railing, the wind tugging at it like restless spirits. And then he heard it. From beyond the fog, deep and resonant, came the blast of a foghorn, 3 long calls that rattled the windows of his cottage, a sound he had not heard in decades. Samuel straightened, heart pounding. His body remembered what his mind tried to deny. That was no pleasure craft signal. That was the voice of warships entering harbor. He gripped the railing, breath sharp. Something was coming. The fog lay heavy over Seabrook Harbor, a ghostly veil that blurred the horizon into white. For a moment, the world was nothing but mist and silence, until the second foghorn shattered the quiet, deep, relentless. The sound of giants approaching. Samuel froze on his porch. That signal wasn't a warning for yachts. It was the voice of the fleet, the call of ships carved from steel and blood. And then, like phantoms breaching the veil, they appeared. First one, then another. Their gray silhouettes sharpened with each throb of the engines. Destroyers, carriers, ships of war cutting through the mist with disciplined precision. Their American flags hung at half-mast, the wind tugging them toward the shore like a salute across time. Within minutes, 5 Navy vessels had slipped silently into Seabrook Harbor. No announcement had preceded them. No ceremony was planned. Yet their presence commanded silence. Shops along the boardwalk closed as owners stepped outside. Children were pulled from summer classes, their chatter falling to whispers. Joggers slowed, unsure if they were witnessing history or a dream. From his vantage point, Samuel felt the hairs rise along his arms. His pulse hammered. Why here? Why now? On the dock, townspeople gathered in confusion. Necks craned, phones raised. The Aurora Crest's partygoers spilled onto its decks, their laughter subdued, champagne glasses forgotten. Caldwell himself strode forward in irritation, as if insulted that attention had been stolen from him. The lead ship, a guided missile destroyer, maneuvered with flawless grace and moored at the central dock. A silence fell so profound that even the gulls seemed to hold their breath. From the deck descended a color guard, crisp in their whites, steps unified as one. At their head walked Rear Admiral Marcus Holloway, his uniform immaculate, his face carved from stone. In his gloved hands, he carried a perfectly folded American flag, the triangular fold that Samuel had seen too many times, always for the fallen. The Admiral's voice carried across the water, commanding and solemn. Chief Petty Officer Samuel Carter. The crowd stirred, head swiveling toward the bluff. Samuel gripped his porch railing until the wood bit into his palm. His knees wavered, but his body moved before his mind consented. Slowly, painfully, he descended the steps, each stride steady despite the ache. The townspeople parted as he walked through, a silent corridor of eyes. For once, no one mocked, no one recorded. They felt it that this moment was not theirs to profane. At the foot of the dock, Admiral Holloway stepped forward. His salute snapped sharp as a rifle shot. "Permission to come ashore and render honors," he said. For a moment, Samuel could not speak. His throat closed, eyes stinging. But reflex, drilled into bone decades earlier, guided him. He straightened, shoulders back, and returned the salute with aching precision. "Permission granted, Admiral." The Admiral descended the gangway, the color guard behind him. The sailors aboard the 5 ships stood at attention, their salutes raised toward shore. The harbor had transformed into a cathedral of silence. And then Holloway spoke not just to Samuel, but to the crowd, to the watching world. 49 years ago, in the South China Sea, this man prevented a catastrophic explosion aboard the USS Hancock. He sealed a ruptured compartment with his own hands, sustaining burns across most of his body. His actions saved over 200 lives. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Eyes swung back to Samuel, searching his face, seeing at last the faint scars that trailed his neck and disappeared under his collar. Holloway's voice hardened. He never accepted recognition. He declined the Navy Cross. He asked only that we care for those who did not return. For nearly 5 decades, he has lived among you in silence, asking nothing. And yesterday, the Admiral's gaze flicked toward Caldwell's yacht. His vessel, built by his own scarred hands, was destroyed in this harbor. No aid was given, no respect was shown. His flag was allowed to sink. A murmur of shame rolled across the crowd. On the Aurora crest, Caldwell shifted uncomfortably, his bravado leaking away as his guests lowered their eyes. Holloway raised the folded flag higher. "The United States Navy does not forget its own. We have come to render honors." A sailor stepped forward, carrying a polished wooden plaque. He bowed his head as he presented it to Samuel. The brass engraving read, "For the man who kept the sea safe, even after the uniform came off. The sea remembers." Samuel's hand trembled as he took it. The tears that had refused to fall the day before now brimmed, hot and unashamed. Behind them, 5 ships' whistles blew in unison, a sound that shook the very marrow of the town. Phones that had mocked him yesterday now streamed live, but the captions were different. Number, veteran, salute. Number, never forgotten. Number, respect the flag. The crowd stood hushed, not out of obligation but reverence. For the first time in decades, Samuel Carter was not invisible. And across the water, the man who had laughed as his boat was crushed now stood silent, stripped bare by the weight of honor he could neither buy nor command. The harbor had never been this silent, not in living memory. The 5 Navy vessels loomed in still formation, great titans at rest, their flags swaying at half-mast. The air itself seemed heavier, as if the entire town held its breath. Admiral Holloway did not look at Samuel now, but turned to the gathered townspeople, his voice cutting through the fog like a bell. "Do not mistake quiet living for insignificance. Do not mistake humility for weakness. This man, Chief Petty Officer Samuel Carter, did more for this country in a single hour than most of us could do in a lifetime. Yet he has walked among you for decades as though he were invisible." Murmurs rippled. People who had once laughed at the viral clip now stared at the ground. Some shifted uncomfortably. Others simply wept. On the Aurora crest, the party was over. Caldwell stood stiff at the railing, no champagne in hand, no smirk twisting his lips. His entourage had retreated into silence, their glittering dresses and suits suddenly out of place in the shadow of warships. The Admiral gestured, and the color guard moved in perfect symmetry. A second folded flag was placed in Samuel's hands, fresh, unsoaked by seawater, the stars sharp against the Navy field. Holloway lowered his voice, addressing Samuel directly now. "You think it was just a boat, but Liberty Rose carried more than you. She carried your silence, your scars, your healing. And when they mocked her, they mocked every man who ever gave his blood to keep the sea free." Samuel tried to speak but found no words. His throat tightened, his lips trembled. He simply nodded, gripping the folded flag against his chest. From somewhere in the crowd, a child's voice piped up, cutting through the hush. "He's a hero." A wave passed through the onlookers, first a few claps, then more, until the dock thundered with applause. Strangers moved closer, not to gawk, but to offer their hands, their tears, their apologies. Men who had once walked past Samuel without a word now saluted him with wet eyes. Mothers pulled their children forward to shake his hand. The harbor master, who just yesterday had cited regulations, stepped forward with fishing permits in hand. "For life, Chief Carter," he said hoarsely. "You'll never pay a fee again." The owner of the local marina bowed his head. "Slip space. Free. Forever. For whatever vessel you choose." Samuel nodded, dignity holding his frame upright, though his chest trembled with an emotion too vast to name. The live stream spread like wildfire. Within minutes, comments drowned the earlier mockery. "I had no idea. This man deserves everything. We laughed at him yesterday. God forgive us." Number veteran salute trended worldwide, eclipsing the cruel hashtags of the day before. And for the first time in his long life, Samuel Carter was truly seen. Not for the scars on his neck, not for the wrinkles carved by time, not even for the boat he had lost. He was seen for who he was, a man who had given quietly, suffered quietly, lived quietly, and who carried a dignity no storm could erase. As the applause swelled, Admiral Holloway leaned close, his voice low, meant only for Samuel's ears. "Your grandson David contacted the Navy Alumni Association. That's why we came. He refused to let you remain forgotten." Samuel blinked, his heart lurching. "David?" "Yes," Holloway said. "Why didn't you call us yourself, Chief?" Samuel's voice was rough, the words pulled from deep inside. "It wasn't your problem, sir. It was just a boat." The Admiral shook his head firmly. "No, Carter. It was never just a boat. And you were never just a sailor." The crowd cheered again as the destroyer saluted with one final blast. Samuel Carter stood straighter than he had in years, the folded flag pressed against his chest, the shame of yesterday burned away by the fire of recognition. And somewhere in the shadows of the crowd, Ethan Caldwell lowered his sunglasses, his face pale. For the first time, his wealth could not shield him. The world had turned. The sea had remembered. The next days in Seabrook were unlike anything Samuel Carter had ever seen. Everywhere he went, heads turned not with mockery, but reverence. The same townsfolk who once brushed past him on the boardwalk now stopped to shake his hand, to thank him, to apologize. Dockhands who had laughed while filming the Liberty Rose's destruction now avoided his gaze or offered quiet nods of respect. Tourists paused at the harbor, whispering, pointing not at Caldwell's gleaming yacht but at Samuel, the man whose silence had been broken by the thunder of 5 warships. For the first time in decades, Samuel wasn't invisible. The town council convened an emergency session. Within a week, a simple stone marker was unveiled at the empty mooring where Liberty Rose once rested. The inscription read, "Liberty Rose, she carried more than one life." At the dedication, townspeople cried openly. Children left flowers. Fishermen who had been driven to the edges of Seabrook returned for the ceremony, caps in hand, tears streaking faces weathered by sea and salt. The shift was undeniable. Where once Caldwell's yacht had been the pride of Seabrook, now it stood awkward and obscene in the shadow of a memorial stone. Its neon lights seemed garish, its parties hollow. Caldwell himself withdrew from public appearances, avoiding the gaze of a town that no longer celebrated him. And yet, despite the new reverence, Samuel carried himself as he always had. Quiet, deliberate, steady. He still rose before dawn, though now with no vessel to greet him. Instead, he walked the docks, his cane tapping rhythmically against the wood, nodding to the fishermen who treated him like a brother again. Children began to follow him, tugging at his sleeves, begging for stories, lessons. At first he resisted, shy of their eager eyes. But slowly, his hands remembered the old crafts. Rope and knots, lines and hitches. With practiced fingers, he showed them the bowline, the clove hitch, the square knot. "This one," he would say, his gravelly voice steady, "has saved sailors for centuries. A rope remembers what a man teaches it." Their eyes lit with wonder, and Samuel felt something he hadn't in years. Purpose. National media picked up the story. Forgotten veteran honored by Navy in small town blared across screens. News anchors called him the quiet hero of Seabrook. Veterans groups rallied behind him, writing op-eds about the importance of remembering those who serve long after the uniforms are hung up. But not everyone was ready to let him heal. One evening, as Samuel sat on his porch overlooking the harbor, footsteps crunched on the gravel path. He looked up to see Ethan Caldwell alone, without his entourage, without his sunglasses, without the smug grin. For the first time, Samuel saw not arrogance, but hesitation in the man's eyes. "Mr. Carter," Caldwell began, his voice uneven, "I came to apologize." Samuel said nothing. He waited, steady as stone, letting the younger man wrestle with words he clearly wasn't used to saying. Caldwell shifted, cleared his throat, then held out an envelope. "There's a blank check inside. Whatever you think is fair compensation for the boat, for my conduct, just name the amount." Samuel didn't move. He let the silence stretch until Caldwell's hand began to tremble. Finally, Samuel spoke, his voice quiet but cutting. "Money won't rebuild what was lost." Caldwell swallowed hard. "Then tell me what will." The billionaire's mask cracked. There was no performance left, no audience to impress. For the first time, he was just a man desperate to erase the stain of humiliation the whole world had seen. Samuel studied him for a long moment. Then he nodded toward the eastern pier. "There's a spot over there. Faces the sunrise. Put a bench there, a good one. Solid wood. Carve 3 words into it. Sit. Remember. Thank." Caldwell blinked. "That's it? Just a bench?" Samuel's gaze drifted back to the horizon. "Sometimes, what people need most isn't wealth or noise. Sometimes, they just need a place to stop and remember what matters." Caldwell's lips parted as if to argue, but then he nodded slowly. For the first time in his adult life, he accepted terms not of his own making. 2 days later, a master craftsman arrived from Seattle, hired by Caldwell at great expense. Together, they installed a teak bench at the Sunrise Pier. Caldwell himself worked until his soft hands blistered, sweat running down his forehead. The 3 words gleamed in bronze. Sit. Remember. Thank. When the bench was unveiled, word spread instantly. National headlines called it the Veterans Bench. Commentators debated whether Carter had been too forgiving or profoundly wise. For Samuel, it was neither. It was simply a reminder that some things were worth pausing for. And on that pier, as the sun rose golden over the harbor, the same sea that had stolen Liberty Rose whispered back to him, not in sorrow this time, but in recognition. The bench became more than wood and bronze. It became a gathering place. Fishermen sat there at dawn, drinking coffee from dented thermoses, tipping their caps to the rising Sunday. Mothers brought their children, pointing at the 3 words, whispering to them the meaning of respect. Tourists paused, not for selfies with yachts, but to touch the bronze letters as though they held something sacred. And Samuel Carter? He sat there too. Not every day, but often enough that people began to notice. When he did, children flocked to him with their ropes, eager to learn the knots of sailors long dead. His hands scarred, crooked with age, moved with surprising precision as he guided their small fingers. "This one's called the bowline," he'd explain, looping the rope with slow patience. "Been saving lives since before Columbus ever dreamed of the ocean." The children listened, solemn and intent. Unlike their parents, they didn't see an old man, they saw a bridge to something older than themselves, something their screens could never replicate. The town itself began to shift. Where Caldwell's yacht had once been the symbol of Seabrook, now it seemed gaudy, irrelevant. Its parties dwindled. Its lights felt intrusive against the dignity of the new bench. The memorial at the dock for Liberty Rose became a place of quiet reverence. Flowers laid weekly, flags folded on its stone base. But the story did not end there. 1 month after the Navy's arrival, Admiral Holloway returned. No ships this time, just himself, driving an old civilian sedan. He found Samuel sitting at the bench, surrounded by children learning the figure-8 knot. Holloway approached, his uniform replaced with a simple shirt and jacket. "Chief," he said warmly, "I bring news." Samuel raised his weathered face. "News rarely comes without cost." The Admiral smiled faintly. "This one comes with an offer. The Secretary of the Navy has authorized a youth maritime program, seamanship, navigation, environmental stewardship. They want instructors men who understand not just the sea, but the souls who walk upon it." Samuel frowned. "I'm an old man, Admiral. I don't have much left to give." Holloway chuckled softly. "Tell that to these children. He gestured at the group, clinging to Samuel's every word. I saw you yesterday, teaching them knots with more patience than I've ever had. Don't underestimate the value of time, Carter. It may be the rarest thing you still own. Samuel looked at the children, their bright eyes, their eager hands. His chest tightened. Perhaps Holloway was right. Perhaps the sea wasn't done with him yet. And then, as though summoned by fate, a commotion stirred at the harbor entrance. A small vessel, newly built, was being towed toward the dock. Its wooden hull gleamed fresh with varnish, its lines unmistakably traditional. The crowd that gathered buzzed with whispers. At the helm stood David, his grin wide, his eyes shining. "Surprise, Grandpa!" he shouted over the waves. We all pitched in. Veterans from 4 states came to help. The Boat Builders Association donated materials. I found your old plans in the shed. We followed them line by line. The boat slid into the dock, sunlight gleaming on her polished rails. Her name was painted across the stern in bold, proud letters. Liberty's Dawn. The crowd erupted in cheers. Fishermen clapped each other's backs. Children squealed. Strangers wiped tears. Samuel stood frozen, his face working with emotion. As David secured the mooring lines, his voice cracked. It's not exactly the same. We added safety features, modern navigation. But the soul is yours, Grandpa. The sea will carry you again. Samuel stepped forward slowly, his legs trembling, his hand reaching for the rail. When his palm touched the polished wood, he felt the old rhythm return, the heartbeat of the ocean pulsing through her frame. A new American flag snapped in the wind at her stern, crisp and defiant. Samuel's breath shuddered. He climbed aboard, his body remembering, his balance instinctive. He whispered, "She'll do. She'll more than do." From the pier, David's voice carried softly, "For the man who kept faith, even when no one was watching." Samuel's tears spilled freely now. For the first time in decades, he did not hide them. The sea had taken Liberty Rose, but it had given him Liberty's Dawn. That evening, the harbor glowed in gold and crimson as the sun sank into the sea. Samuel sat on the new teak bench at the eastern pier, his cane propped against the armrest, the bronze words catching the dying light. Sit. Remember. Thank. Beside him, Liberty's Dawn bobbed gently in her slip, her varnished wood shimmering, her flag snapping sharp in the breeze. She was no longer just a boat, she was the proof that silence hadn't buried him, that faith in the sea, in memory, still lived. Tourists paused nearby, curious about the man and his bench. A young family lingered, reading the carved words. Their child, no older than 6, tugged at his father's hand. "Daddy, what does it mean?" The man crouched to his child's height, glancing at Samuel with a nod of respect. "It means," he said carefully, "that sometimes we have to stop and remember the people who made our lives possible, and we should thank them." The child looked at Samuel with wide eyes, then whispered, "Thank you." Samuel's throat tightened. He gave the smallest of nods, but inside, something long dormant stirred the warmth of being seen not as a relic, but as part of a living chain, carrying forward into the future. Days passed, and the story of Liberty's Dawn spread far beyond Seabrook. News outlets ran segments about the rebirth of a veteran's vessel. Veterans associations called it a symbol of resilience. Social media that once mocked him now overflowed with tributes. But with recognition came confrontation. One late afternoon, Samuel found Ethan Caldwell waiting by the pier. No entourage, no cameras, just him. His designer shoes scuffed, his hands raw with fresh blisters that spoke of labor unaccustomed. "Mr. Carter," Caldwell began, voice low, stripped of its earlier arrogance. "I helped with the bench, but it's not enough." Samuel regarded him silently, the ocean wind tugging at his jacket. Caldwell's jaw tightened. "I was raised to believe money fixes everything. It doesn't. The world saw me for what I am, a spoiled fool, and they saw you for what you are. I can't erase what I did, but I want to make it right." Samuel's eyes narrowed. "You can't buy back what was lost." "I'm not trying to," Caldwell said quickly. "I'm asking what I can build instead." For a long moment, Samuel said nothing. Then his gaze drifted toward the children gathered near the docks, practicing knots he had taught them. Their voices filled with laughter. His hand rested on the cane, knuckles whitening. "You want to make it right?" Samuel said at last, his voice gravelly but firm. "Then build something that lasts longer than you. Not a yacht, not a party, not a headline. Something that teaches people to remember." Caldwell nodded slowly, absorbing the words. For once, he didn't argue. He didn't flinch. He only said, "Tell me what needs to be done." And for the first time, Samuel saw in the younger man not arrogance, but the flicker of someone willing to learn. That night, Liberty's Dawn rocked gently at her mooring, and Samuel sat on the bench as the tide whispered against the pilings. The sea, once a place of solitude, had become something new, something shared. The man who had walked in silence for decades now felt the weight of voices rising behind him, carrying his story into the future. He had not asked for justice. He had not demanded wealth. He had simply lifted a torn flag from the water and walked away. But now, the sea itself had answered. Weeks turned into months, and Seabrook Harbor was no longer the same place. The bench at the Eastern Pier became a landmark, not because it was ornate or expensive, but because it demanded something modern life rarely offered. Pause. Travelers stopped there to reflect. Veterans touched the bronze words with reverence. Children climbed on its sturdy arms, asking questions their parents struggled to answer. Sit. Remember. Thank. The words carried further than Samuel Carter had imagined. News crews filmed segments there. Schools organized field trips. People from out of town drove hours just to sit on the wood worn smooth by salt air and human hands. But Samuel himself didn't seek the spotlight. He still walked the docks before dawn, though now he was rarely alone. Children fell into step beside him, ropes in hand, eager for his lessons. He showed them how to splice, how to tie a hitch that could hold against a gale, how to respect a knot as much as the sea it served. "You tie it right," he'd say, his gravelly voice steady. "It'll save your life. Tie it sloppy. It'll betray you." The kids listened, wide-eyed, repeating the motions until their fingers learned what their minds could not yet grasp. Discipline, patience, respect. The ripple spread further still. Fishermen, once pushed aside by luxury yachts, found themselves welcomed back into the harbor. Tourists began asking them for stories, for lessons, for the history of Seabrook that money could not buy. Caldwell's Aurora crest still floated in its berth, but the neon glow that once dominated the night now looked garish compared to the quiet dignity of Liberty's Dawn moored nearby. And then came Admiral Holloway once more, not in dress whites, not in ceremony, but in a simple windbreaker, his stride purposeful. He found Samuel at the bench, surrounded by a half-dozen children trying to master the bowline. "Chief Carter," Holloway said warmly, "still teaching the next generation?" Samuel's smile was faint, but it reached his eyes. "The sea doesn't forgive ignorance. Better they learn young." The Admiral sat beside him, the bench creaking gently under their weight. "The Secretary of the Navy asked me to speak with you. They're expanding a youth maritime program, seamanship, navigation, even environmental stewardship. They need men like you. Instructors who understand the sea and the people who sail it." Samuel frowned. "I'm no school teacher." Holloway chuckled. "Tell that to those kids hanging on your every word." He leaned closer. "It's not about textbooks. It's about wisdom, the kind only scars can teach." Samuel looked at the children, their eager faces, their clumsy knots. He thought of David, who had fought for him when Samuel himself had refused. He thought of Liberty Rose, gone beneath the waves, and Liberty's Dawn, born from the hands of those who refused to forget him. His voice was quiet. "Maybe I've got a little left to give." The Admiral clapped him on the shoulder. "More than you realize, Chief. More than you realize." Just then, a stir rose at the harbor entrance. A small boat approached, its fresh paint gleaming in the evening Sunday. On her stern, in bold new lettering, her name caught the light, Liberty's Dawn. The crowd that had gathered for no reason but instinct erupted in cheers. Veterans saluted. Children pointed. Fishermen whistled. David stood at the helm, guiding her with steady hands, pride shining on his face. "She's ready," David called, "and she's waiting for her captain." Samuel's breath caught. He stood, leaning on his cane, and made his way to the dock. His hand found the polished rail, warm under the setting Sunday. He stepped aboard with the balance of a man who had never left the sea. The flag at her stern cracked in the breeze, new but already carrying the weight of history. Samuel placed his hand on it, whispering words only the sea could hear. And in that moment, the old sailor was whole again. The first voyage of Liberty's Dawn was not a grand spectacle. There were no fireworks, no reporters, no speeches. It was just Samuel Carter, his grandson David, and a handful of children who begged to join. The harbor was still as the boat slipped free of her lines. Samuel's hand rested on the tiller, and though his joints protested, his body remembered. Each sway of the hull, each rise of the tide, it was like breathing again after years underwater. The children chattered excitedly, pointing at gulls, asking 100 questions. Samuel answered few, letting the rhythm of the sea do most of the teaching. He showed them how to feel the wind on their cheeks, how to read the surface ripples for the pull of a current. "Listen," he said quietly, holding up a hand. The chatter stopped. All that remained was the sound of waves against wood, the cry of gulls, the sigh of the wind. That's the sea talking. If you want her respect, you listen first. Their eyes widened. For them, this was magic. For Samuel, it was home. When they returned, the dock was full of townspeople waiting, cheering, clapping. Veterans saluted, mothers wiped tears. Even the hardened fishermen, who rarely gave praise, tipped their caps. But the most surprising sight was Ethan Caldwell. He stood at the pier's edge, sleeves rolled up, his once manicured hands still raw from labor. When Samuel stepped ashore, Caldwell extended his hand not with arrogance, but humility. "I can't undo what I did," Caldwell said, voice rough. "But I can learn from it. If you'll allow me, I want to help. The youth program, the bench, whatever you need." Samuel studied him for a long moment. He saw not the swaggering billionaire, but a man stripped bare by shame, trying to rebuild something that money could not buy. "Then start by showing up," Samuel said finally. "Not with your checkbook, with your hands, with your time." Caldwell nodded once. "I will." Word of Samuel's first sail on Liberty's Dawn spread quickly. National networks filmed the children clambering down the dock with coils of rope in their arms, grinning ear to ear. Headlines read, "Forgotten Veteran Now Teaches Seabrook's Children the Ways of the Sea." From viral mockery to living legend. The Navy made it official 2 weeks later. Samuel Carter was named honorary instructor of the Maritime Youth Program. He was given a stipend, a title, but most importantly, a mission. On his first day, dozens of children lined the pier, ropes in hand, eyes bright. Samuel looked at them at their restless energy, their hunger to learn, and something in his chest lifted. "This rope," he said, holding one aloft, "isn't just cord, it's a promise. Tie it wrong, it betrays you. Tie it right, it holds your life. That's the lesson. Do things with care, or don't do them at all." Their small hands moved clumsily at first, but Samuel was patient. Each mistake, he corrected with calm precision. And when a child tied their first perfect knot, the pride in their face was brighter than any medal. That night, Samuel sat once more on the bench, watching the sunset. Liberty's Dawn rocked gently in her slip. Beside him, David sat quietly, eyes fixed on the horizon. "You've given them something to remember," David said. Samuel shook his head softly. "No, they've given me something to carry forward." For the first time in years, he didn't feel like a relic of the past. He felt like part of the tide flowing into the future. Autumn settled over Seabrook, painting the harbor in golden rust. The air grew sharp, the gulls wheeled lower, and the nights brought with them the steady whisper of the sea against the pier. Every morning now, the eastern bench filled with people. Some came to sit in silence, some came to lay flowers or flags. Others came to watch Samuel Carter walk the docks, cane in hand, children trailing behind him like ducklings. He was no longer the old man with the broken boat. He was the harbor's living memory. One late afternoon, as the sun bled crimson into the water, Liberty's Dawn returned from a training sail. Samuel guided her into the slip, his hands steady on the rail. The children jumped ashore, ropes in their arms, their laughter carrying across the water. David followed, pride blazing in his eyes. On the pier, a young couple paused at the bench. Their child, perhaps 7, traced the bronze letters with a finger. "Sit, remember, thank." The boy read aloud. "What does it mean?" The father crouched, his gaze lingering on Samuel before he answered. It means we should stop sometimes. We should remember the people who came before us, and we should thank them for what we have. The boy nodded solemnly, as if he understood more than his years should allow. Samuel watched quietly, his chest tightening. That bench born of humiliation, paid for by a man who once laughed at his ruin, had become something far greater. It had become a lesson carved into wood and bronze, that dignity cannot be bought, and silence does not erase honor. As dusk deepened, Ethan Caldwell appeared again, carrying planks of wood across his shoulder. His once pristine hands were calloused now, blistered into honesty. He had kept his word, showing up day after day to work beside fishermen, to mend nets, to sweep docks. He said little, but he stayed. Samuel acknowledged him with a nod. No more, no less. It was enough. Later, as the harbor quieted and lanterns flickered on the pier, Samuel sat on the bench alone. The sea stretched endlessly before him, a horizon of memory and promise. Liberty's dawn swayed at her mooring, her flag snapping in the night wind. He thought of Liberty Rose, swallowed by the waves. He thought of the brothers who never came home. He thought of David, whose stubborn fire had refused to let his grandfather vanish into silence. And he thought of the children, their clumsy knots slowly becoming perfect, their futures tied securely with rope and respect. He closed his eyes. The sea spoke in whispers, steady, eternal. He hadn't asked for justice. He hadn't asked for wealth. He hadn't asked for applause. He had only picked up a torn flag from the water and walked away. And yet, the next morning, the sea remembered him.